went to sleep, and the next morning the parents and grandparents woke up and the girls were gone.
We didn't hear anything for like a week, wondering what happened and stuff like that. Why isn't she back? Melissa's mom and dad came over and said they didn't bring my sister back because they supposedly supposed to have been hitchhiking back. Talked to the Lebanon Police Department about it, and they pretty much blew it off like, yeah, that's just Sheila. She's just out running, doing what she wants to do type of deal.
The parents reported them missing after they'd been gone for about a week to 10 days. Not much came up until October of 92 when some hunters were hunting off Highway 20 and came across the bodies of two deceased people. And they were later identified as Melissa and Sheila.
Finding human remains along Highway 20 was nothing new over the years. In 1976, a skull belonging to an unidentified woman was found near Swamp Mountain. In 1978, the skull of another unidentified woman was found near Snow Creek. Also in 1978, the body of Elizabeth Musler, a young woman who had disappeared from Lebanon, was found in a shallow grave near Green Peter Reservoir. A year before that, personal effects belonging to two missing teenagers, Rodney Grissom and Karen Lee, had been found off a logging road near Highway 20, about a half-hour east of Sweet Home. Nothing beyond circumstance ever linked Aykroyd to any of these deaths, but circumstance is enough for Karen's mother, Violet, who is convinced he was her daughter's killer.
The last I heard was she called her friend in Wisconsin and she said to her, "Our ride's here, I have to go." And the next thing I know, it's Christmas and they find her stuff.
And this is where they found the first set of clothes. We brought up cadaver dogs, and we worked this area for a long time, just hoping we would find some human remains, and we never did.
You know, when they found her stuff, it was like, it was her purse, it was her makeup, it was everything she wouldn't have gone on without. And one shoe, where's she gonna go with one shoe? She couldn't have gotten out of there with one shoe.
You do have this cluster of cases in the area. A detective wouldn't be doing their job if they didn't look into Aykroyd's involvement in those cases, because it just made sense.
It was just a feeling that I had that this guy had something to do with it. He lived near there. He worked in those areas, so he knew back roads. He knew, he worked for the highway department. I feel in here that that's what happened to her.
Karen's jeans appeared to have been cut, echoing Marlene Gabrielson's rape, which occurred around the same time. It's impossible to know if the same clue would have turned up in Aykroyd's stepdaughter's killing, since no trace of Rachanda was ever found. But the same year that Sheila and Melissa went missing, Rachanda's cousin Jennifer thought Aykroyd might have taken her to the spot where he stashed her body.
John came up every weekend. I asked him if I could get a ride from him to my friend's house. And he said, yeah. We were going on Highway 20 towards Sweet Home. We passed the junction. Usually, if he needs anything, he stops there at the junction where he lives and picks up whatever he needs. He passed it. And he pulled off alongside the road, and he turns to me, and he looks at me, and he says, you could kill somebody and hide a body here, and nobody'd ever find it. And something inside me told me not to get out of the truck. And so he was like, I gotta pee, do you need to go? I was like, no, I'm good. He got out of the truck, and he was gone for about 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. I thought, that's an awful long time to go pee.
Looking back on that now, what do you think that was about?
Oh, God. I think he was trying to make sure that he disposed of the body. I think that he wanted to make sure nobody found it at that point. And it freaked me out, because I was 16 years old, Why would an adult tell a 16-year-old that? And that was like 2 years after my cousin came up missing.
To some of his co-workers at Santiam Junction, it seemed obvious that Aykroyd was responsible for his stepdaughter's disappearance. But the continuing investigation becoming a distraction and some workers not feeling safe around him, the highway department eventually transferred Aykroyd to a shop in Sweet Home, where his reputation preceded him.
My first time that I went to Santiam Junction was somewhere around 1979, winter of 79 or 80. This guy came out from behind the truck and said, "Hey, I'm John," and reached out. When he touched my hand, I literally froze up and thought to myself, "Oh my God, I just met the devil." After Jenna disappeared, and there had been a number of investigations, the district manager came to me and said, "We're going to reassign John Aykroyd to your shop." And I said, "No, I don't need him at my shop." And they said, "You don't understand. You don't have a choice. And he's not going to be working out of your shop. He's just going to be parking his truck there morning and night. He's going to be driving wherever every day." At least at Santiam Junction, he had oversight. He did not have oversight once they moved into District 4. He comes here and gets in a truck and leaves. None of us really know where he is or where he's going. Wow, what do you guys think? And I'm sure there's more than, in hindsight, they realized they probably made a large error.
By the time Aykroyd was transferred from Santiam Junction, he and Linda had split up. He moved in with his mother in Sweet Home, near the shop where he was now based. He soon began spending evenings in nearby Lebanon at a Sherry's restaurant, a popular 24-hour gathering spot for locals.
The young people from Sweet Home, the teenagers from Sweet Home in Lebanon, would hang out at the Sherry's. Melissa and Sheila started hanging out with that group 2 to 3 months before we start talking to this one couple who actually remembered things very, very well given the amount of time that went by. They started talking about this guy, John, that worked for ODOT, that also kind of hung around on the fringes of this group, and that he was really, really interested in Melissa and Sheila, that whenever they would arrive, he would make a beeline for them and interact with them.
He was here a lot. He used to give a bunch of the girls rides, the perv. That's what we called him. It's short for pervert. That was his CB handle. And then we called him the perv because it just fit him better.
By all accounts, Sheila and Melissa were there most nights, and Aykroyd was there most nights.
The girls start talking about taking this vacation to the coast, and all of a sudden, the week before they're going to go, John Aykroyd is telling everybody that he's got a house in Newport, and he's having a party the same weekend that these girls are going to be camping with their parents. Nobody else showed an interest in it, but the girls did say that they were going to be at the beach and that they were going to go. I think it was purely a means to meet up with the girls that weekend. That plan got foiled because the girls didn't end up going over on Saturday. They ended up going over on Sunday.
This must have been from, it says she was 15. Happy Mother's Day. I couldn't find a card to say what I really wanted to say. And that's I love you. Hope you have a nice Mom's Day. 1977. That was just before she came up. Yeah. Just such a massive coincidence of location and time, and I just always felt that he'd done it. I do feel like he did it. I don't know why. Why? That would be what I'd want to know. Why? I guess he didn't need a reason. I don't know.
We worked with the FBI who did a background on him, they said he's one of these opportunity abductors. And he will kill as often as he gets an opportunity to do so.
We had that written up on the board, opportunistic. And like with Rashonda and her brother go off to spend the summer with her dad. But Rashonda comes back alone. So for the first time, the brother's no longer in the picture. Within 2 days of Rashonda coming back, John Aykroyd makes up an excuse to be home alone with her during the day. And then when she's with Melissa, he's grooming them, he is stalking them, and he's planning on where he can be alone with them.
The opportunity's there, and he takes it. So how many are really out there? We really don't know.
At Beverly Beach on their camping trip, Melissa and Sheila decided they wanted to head back home. Late at night, they called friends from a payphone asking for a ride. When no one could come get them, they said they'd hitchhike back instead. It was the last time anyone ever heard from them.
Would she hitchhike? Yeah, she'd hitchhike. She didn't have much of an issue about hitchhiking, but for her to be hitchhiking at night and being picked up, no, that wasn't her. She was scared of the dark completely.
Sheila Swanson was terrified of the dark. What we feel happened is that they left at the crack of dawn the next day and started hitchhiking toward Sweet Home. Aykroyd would have left the Sweet Home ODOT yard about 8 o'clock in the morning, so he would be traveling on to Corvallis and then coming on into Newport. At some point, someone saw an ODOT truck picking up 2 girls at the junction of Highway 20 and the Toledo East Junction. What we do surmise is that at some point he has the girls in the ODOT truck and he's traveling east towards Sweet Home. ODOT is doing a lot of work on Highway 20, and they have flaggers both on Highway 20 and up Nashville Road. They would notice if he had 2 girls in the truck with him. Where the girls was found off Hayes Creek Road is the last place that you can pull off Highway 20 before you would meet where they were working on the road. So we surmise that he pulled off to wait for the flaggers to be gone. Probably where the girls were murdered was in that isolated area off Hayes Creek Road. There are no homes there for quite a way. It's not likely that somebody's going to be coming by there.
In the weeks after their disappearance, not many people outside their immediate families showed much concern for Sheila and Melissa. Police assembled no search parties. The media provided little coverage. In their hardscrabble world, the young women had few protectors and even fewer opportunities to rise above a culture hardwired to look the other way when confronted with marginalized women. A predator like Aykroyd knew that.
I interviewed a co-worker of Aykroyd's, and he was telling me how they'd go out, looking for women and, doing cat calls at them and everything else. And I asked him a little bit about whether he thought he could do something so evil. He wouldn't answer that, but he told me, he said, so what if he did? He said, women have caused all the wars in the world. Women have caused all the problems in the world. What's a few less women? Well, this isn't even our suspect. But he hung around with our suspect.
Once the girls were found, we kind of just forgot about them and moved on. Now I think about it a lot more, like when people die, but then I would be like, oh no. And I know that sounds really bad. And it was, now that I think about it, that was pretty. And none of us went to the funeral. None of us have ever talked to the family. It ceased to exist, and we just quit talking about it. Now, when I think about it, I think I might have been able to prevent it, but I was young and didn't care. I know that sounds bad. it's okay. It just, if that would have been my girls, would I have wanted somebody to step in? And probably, but I didn't. I was a kid for that.
When I asked Ron, who's looking out right now, who's speaking for the Melissa and Sheila, I really it's just you basically.
Yeah, no one else is around, I don't think. Since I was 16 years old, I pretty much made my life completely evolved around the disappearance of my sister and who did it and stuff like that. I went up to where she was found probably 100 times. I've laid down the same spot where she was found. I held a big deal on what happened to my sister because I always promised her, nothing will ever happen to you. I guarantee that, it was a promise. And that's just something I can't take back. Would I change that promise? No. It'd be the same promise it was back then as it is today. It's just one that was never completely fulfilled.
Aykroyd's odd schedule and work arrangement at the Sweet Home maintenance yard meant he rarely interacted with his coworkers there. But on one night, when the shop would normally have been empty, he surprised two workers who were there on a special shift. At the time, the encounter struck the men as strange, but it would acquire a more sinister meaning later on.
It was probably around 9:30, and I heard the door open, and I go, who in the world's that? Aykroyd had come in and parked over next to our office in the bay. He started to walk over, going through the area, and we noticed he had blood all over his hands and arms. And I go, what the heck happened to you? And he goes, I ran into a deer and I just had to gut him out. Most of the time, if you hit a deer, you just throw it off the road into the ditch and go on. Why would you get a deer in the middle of the night? That didn't make sense. Did not make sense.
The story he told one person was that he gutted a deer for someone else, for another motorist. And they took it.
No. That doesn't sound like something Aykroyd would do.
They mentioned it to me the next time I saw him, which I think was the next day. Just brought it up. Aykroyd came in last night and he was all bloody and we were kind of going, are you okay? And he said, I butchered a deer for somebody. That was kind of that. Nothing of it. Somewhere down the line, they started talking about these two girls being missing from Newport.
And that's kind of when we put two and two together. Like, wait a minute. Those girls disappeared about that time when he came in with all that blood on his hands.
Both Marvin and Rick came to me and they were just totally freaked out. What if he murdered those girls and that wasn't really deer blood? He had been in Newport. He had been working over there. And then he's all bloody.
It'd probably never leave my mind. Just that part of it. Nobody ever asked us.
Aykroyd's name had come up when Sheila and Melissa disappeared. One officer had even sketched out his connections to the girls through who they each knew and where they all lived. But he was being more thoroughly investigated for other crimes. The K. Turner Task Force was closing in, and Aykroyd knew it.
In this interview with Aykroyd, he denies murdering Turner, saying only he visited a friend at Camp Sherman the morning Turner disappeared.
Well, they're talking to the guy that admits that he killed her.
What's his name?
Roger.
Roger.
I think Beck.
Friend of yours?
Not really. It's friends of mine, but I didn't have nothing to do with it. And they got a guy that's admitting that he killed her, bragging about it. In fact, there's a grand jury went on Monday and Tuesday to see if they have enough evidence to get him. But if somebody admits that they killed somebody, that should be enough evidence right there.
At the time he killed Sheila and Melissa, he knew
that was going to come soon. They were actively working both Kay Turner and Rashonda at that time. He was moving property out of a storage unit around that time, so yeah, he knew that he was on short time. Yeah.
When John Aykroyd was a young man, his family placed an ad in the local newspaper for some Labrador puppies they had for sale. In a police interview years later, an acquaintance who showed up to look at them described a horrifying scene. He said he walked in to find puppy body parts scattered across the yard. Aykroyd had hacked the entire litter to death with a machete, saying, "These are my dogs, and nobody's gonna get them."
The only thing between more innocent people being murdered and him running free was us.
Who knows what he would have gotten away with? How many other people would have died at his hands?
That's where I have issues about, the not knowing. He went to the grave with a lot of secrets. Where's the justice in all this? You don't get to know where she's at. How's this right?
Was he an evil guy? Hell yeah, he was. Did he deserve to die in prison? Yeah, he did. And hopefully he's enjoying his time in hell.
I know this road back on the head. Same with the stations, only up and back. Farms and truck stops, fireworks stands. I know this road like the back of my hand.
By June of 1992, the task force investigating John Aykroyd had pivoted from the case of Aykroyd's missing stepdaughter, 13-year-old Rashonda Pickle, to the 1978 murder of Kay Turner, for which he had long been the prime suspect. Two young women who were recent acquaintances of Aykroyd's, Melissa Sanders and Sheila Swanson, had also recently disappeared. The walls were closing in on Aykroyd.
Well, we're really just getting started. This is the first step. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. It's just an accumulation at this point of a lot of hard detective work that's been done by a lot of different agencies to get it to this point.
Aykroyd and another man, Roger Beck, are charged with kidnapping, raping, and killing Kay Turner.
That June 12th, John Aykroyd was finally arrested, along with his friend Roger Dale Beck. Beck had been with Aykroyd the day Kay Turner disappeared, but was largely ignored in the original investigation. More than a decade had passed since Kay's killing, and there wasn't much new physical evidence to uncover. But in Beck, the task force saw a potential suspect. They took a fresh look at him and found a goldmine of new information.
Beck, initially, he was an alibi witness.
He was a friend of John's. They were guys that spent a lot of time together.
We didn't think he was really one of the main players. We thought Aykroyd killed her maybe on the way down to Beck's house, and they went out and they established this alibi thing.
Investigators interviewed Beck's family members and began hearing variations of the same story, that Beck had spoken many times over the years about taking part in Kay's murder, sometimes even bragging about it.
They interviewed his sister. She had picked up Beck once or twice when he got drunk in a bar and couldn't drive home, and picked him up and he was crying and made some statements about how they killed him.
And you knew Roger, right? He was basically your brother-in-law, right?
Right. Roger went around bragging about it all the time.
And you threaten Pam, and well, why would he threaten Pam and threaten his kids, saying, well, I'll just get you just like I did that girl up there, scatter you all over the country.
There was a guy there, I don't know if it was Pam's brother or brother-in-law, something. He had some statements that Beck made. They were leaving. He said, we got to go up on the mountain and see John get our story straight.
Pam was Beck's ex-wife, Pam Ramirez. She had originally provided an alibi for both Beck and Aykroyd for the morning Kay was killed, but had divorced him and moved to California in the years since.
It became obvious we needed to interview Beck's ex-wife. So we planned a meeting in California.
That's when it really opened up. The famous quote was like, I lied like hell. When Beck and him returned that day that she disappeared, they had blood all over them.
He had her burn his clothes and his brand new boots.
Both had blood on them, and they didn't have a deer like they were supposed to have.
It became very clear that Beck was a part of it that day, and that she actually knew that he was a part of it and covered it up. But she was very afraid of him, and for good reason.
She was afraid to until after they got a divorce. And then she decided to tell the truth.
She has told us that you talked to her a couple of days after the gal's missing and told her that she had to lie for you.
I never had nobody lie for me.
Okay, you're certain about that?
Yes.
That you've never had that conversation with me? And Roger Beck, he's kind of a busy guy too, isn't he?
Oh yeah, he's a really good to live on.
Now, we've told you also in the past that we have talked to people who said that he told them that you and he killed a lady that was jogging.
Yeah, that's what you say, but like I told you, I did not kill nobody.
With no way to know exactly what had happened the morning of Kay's murder, investigators came up with a novel idea. They decided to recreate and videotape different scenarios based on the little information they did have. They asked deputies and detectives to play Kay, Aykroyd, and Beck, found a truck like the one Aykroyd drove in 1978, and met at Camp Sherman in the winter of 1992. They couldn't use the videos as evidence, but the exercise helped investigators test theories on how Kay's abduction might have happened, and humanized a woman none of them had ever known.
I was basically the same physical height and build and looked a lot like what Kay looked like at the time she was killed. They just had me jogging down the road, filming, and they would have Aykroyd's vehicle approach me. Only difference is I knew what was coming and she didn't. It was just basically 2 days of repeating a scenario over and over until we got it right, or adding a new little twist to it where they had gained control over her a different way. Will McAnulty was lead detective on this case, and he's a bear of a man with a heart of a teddy bear. He said to me, let's film this one more time, and this time I want Kay to win. And in the last scenario, I was able to take the gun away, and I shot him. It was empowering to be able to pull it away from him and put him down. I wish Kay would have had the chance to do that.
Aykroyd's trial began in August of 1993. Prosecutors had plenty of circumstantial evidence, but physical evidence was scarce. They had little more than what was found in 1979. A few bones, what was left of Kay's clothes, and her Timex watch.
She wound her watch and timed every single run that she ever ran for years. The watch wouldn't have just run down when she was running.
Kay's watch offered a chance to prove the date and time she was killed. Establishing that she had died the same morning she disappeared, when Aykroyd admitted to stopping and talking to her, would further tie him to the scene of the crime.
Timex, they take a licking and keep on ticking. I mean, that was a perfect example of that. The Timex guy, he was the designer of this thing. He was R&D on this watch. They had a stem that pulled out, and you wound it. And he testified basically that the only three ways that the watch could have stopped where it ran down, and we pretty much eliminated that. Or the stem gets pulled out, so you can pull it out and you can wind it up without changing the time. Or it can, if it has a really substantial blow that exceeds the shock limits of the watch. Basically, I mean, our pitch was, either by grabbing her or pulling off her shirt, that stem got pulled out somehow. So we were actually able to prove that the watch would still run, and it was on AM, so it was exactly the time she would have been there, and it had the 24 on it as well, so it was the right thing.
With the time of her death established by the watch, investigators sought to determine the cause of Kay's death through what little they had of her remains. But not much had ever actually been found. Much of what Aykroyd claimed to have discovered in 1979 turned out to be animal bones.
The only two bones that were identified as human were the only two bones that could identify her, the mandible and the skull, which were separate. Those are the only two that were found.
Prosecutors took what they did have, as well as what was left of Kay's clothes, to a U.S. Fish and Wildlife lab in Southern Oregon for analysis.
We never really had a definitive idea how Kay had died. There were no bullet casings found, there were no bullet fragments recovered or anything like this.
Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, they just built that really sophisticated lab in Ashland. And it had just opened. And they were happy to get something to work on. With their techniques, they could show that this fabric was cut rather than torn. And her panties and shorts had been cut off of her rather than just getting ripped up by a coyote or something.
The evidence of cut clothing bore a striking similarity to both Marlene Gabrielson's rape and Karen Lee's disappearance. But the analysis revealed even more.
There were knife stabs through her shirt, and they found some lead fragments on her shirt where she'd been shot.
So now we have an idea how Kay was killed. All of a sudden, it's like the light bulb went on.
Both Aykroyd and Beck had made some statements, I think, at least Beck had, about being stabbed and shot. So that corroborated those statements that he had made.
It was an enlightening experience when all of a sudden we got, wait a minute, we've been looking at these things as terrors all this time, but in reality, they're not. These are wounds. And that was a big piece of the puzzle that was always missing.
Assistant Attorney General Doug Dawson used graphic discussion about Turner's fatal wounds to try and prove that the only way Aykroyd could know how she died, as he said he did in previous police interviews, was because Aykroyd was indeed the killer.
She was shot and she was stabbed. John correctly guessing that.
Aykroyd's defense hinged on the idea that he was simple-minded and had become confused by police during his various interactions with them. His lawyer offered a theory that it wasn't Kay Turner, but a different runner he had encountered that morning, and that he had conflated the two as a result of the extensive news coverage that had followed Kay's disappearance.
There were two runners, so there was some confusion, but that was basically his thing, was that it was the wrong runner.
That's when I was avidly running, I just got up whenever I got up and put my clothes on and go for my run. And that afternoon I had to go to the store for something, so I went to the store, and that's when we saw search and rescue people were. And so I remember asking, what's going on? And they said, somebody was out running today and she hasn't returned. And I remember just thinking, oh man, and then just went home. For me, they really, really connected. It wasn't till during the trial when I had to go and just say, yes, I was the other person running. Because a lot of, they'd either describe her or me.
If Morris saw Kay or Aykroyd on her run that Christmas Eve morning, neither registered with her as anything unusual, and there's no way of knowing if Aykroyd saw her. But a few months earlier, in August, Morris experienced a frightening encounter with a man on a different Camp Sherman road.
I was working as a waitress at Blackbutte Lodge for that summer, and we often ride our bikes. There were several of us that lived in the Camp Sherman area, so I was just riding back by myself, and I was off the highway, so I was on the road to Camp Sherman, and I was good enough at that time to bike ride without the handlebars. So, and I remember I still had my waitress dress on. I remember that, and there was a pickup truck car kind of just off the road, and there was a person, a guy, kind of moving around and stuff. And as I got closer, he went to the back of his pickup, comes out of the back of the pickup with the gun, and he points it at me, slowing me, and I was just about opposite at that point. He was yelling something like "stop" or "come here" or something. I can't remember exactly. And my mind just went, I'm going for it. So I just dropped down on my handles and pedaled like crazy, and then I weaved because I know it's harder to hit a moving target. And I remember just listening for the motor to start, but he didn't shoot, didn't follow. And when I got to the Camp Sherman homes, I just went past and went to the store to report. The guy pulled a gun on me.
It wasn't until years later, when she was called to testify at John Aykroyd's trial, that she would see the man again.
I just remember looking at him and just going, that was the guy with the gun. Yeah, that was him. That's when it really hit me. That could have been me. That could have been me.
There never was any physical evidence to prove Aykroyd's guilt, but the jury heard the tapes of voluntary interviews he'd given to police after Achanda's disappearance, which contained numerous lies and contradictions.
When did you find her phone? The next summer. Okay. Had you seen her before that? No. Now, if you think back, had you told any officer, anyone, that you had seen her body before that was afraid you were told it? No. In fact, the day that we did find her, my dog found her. The skeleton. I went from there. What did you see when you found her? The skull. You saw the skull? Yes. For sure you... Okay. Yes. Yes, for sure. You're telling me you saw the skull? What else? There's some other bones laying around behind this wall. But the main thing that sticks in my mind is the skull just laying there.
This not only contradicted his statements in earlier interviews, but was simply impossible. In reality, Kay's remains had been scattered by scavengers, and her skull wasn't among what Aykroyd claimed to have found in 1979. Kay's skull wasn't discovered until 1980, when a hunter stumbled across it about a half-mile away. To the jury, when taken as a whole, the taped interviews were almost as good as a confession.
The verdict is in. After just 4 hours of deliberations, a jury tonight has reached its decision in the trial of John Arthur Aykroyd. The jury found Aykroyd guilty on all counts, 2 counts of aggravated murder and 3 counts of murder. Aykroyd was convicted this evening of killing Kay Jean Turner as Turner was jogging on Christmas Eve in Camp Sherman almost 15 years ago.
I feel like justice has been served, but it's not like the total weight's off your back. I mean, maybe it's just going to be there. I think the good guys won. And kind of restored my faith in the system. That it does work.
You do what you can. But it was a very important, maybe one of the most important things I've ever done in my life, is helping get him off the streets. You just don't know how many lives might have been saved.
It saved women's lives. If he'd stayed out, if he had never been convicted, he and maybe Beck would have done more crimes and killed more women. For sure. He managed to get through that whole thing without ever getting caught. That was the only time he's ever been arrested or charged with anything in his life. Not because he was all that smart, but he managed to do it.
How did Aykroyd manage to do it? He was an opportunistic killer who preyed on women who were vulnerable and exposed. A runner on an empty road, a child who feared him, 2 teens adrift in the world. There were no witnesses and no physical evidence. that there had been an unmistakable warning sign. Before he was ever suspected of being a killer, Aykroyd had raped Marlene Gabrielson in the woods outside of Sisters. She went to police, and they dismissed her as a liar. Aykroyd knew he'd gotten away with rape. He even laughed about it. He used the cover of Highway 20 to stalk women who were alone and counted on society's blind eye to marginalize people to avoid prosecution for decades. Killing the right kind of people in the right kind of place during the right kind of time was all it really took. By 2010, Aykroyd had been in prison for almost 20 years. The potential for him to become eligible for parole was on the horizon. Kay Turner's murder was the only one Aykroyd had been tried for, and Richanda Pickles' case was still technically open. Detective Mike Harmon began to pursue its resolution.
They used to say, in cold cases, time was your friend, because relationships change, but at a certain point, time is no longer your friend. If we don't find her body, we're not going to have any additional evidence. So is this case prosecutable now? One of the things that kind of influenced the prosecution was that John was eligible to put in for parole. And one of the things we did not want is John Arthur Aykroyd to be released from prison.
Mike told me, he's like, I'm telling it sound cold, but I don't want that son of a bitch out. And if I got to use your sister as a tool to keep him in there, I'm going to. I don't want this guy out. And I agreed with him. Yeah, absolutely. This guy cannot get out.
The ultimate goal was, especially for Byron, Rashanda's brother, was to get Rashanda back.
I knew it was going to be a long, hard road because Mike was very open, going that he's not admitting to this. He's like, I'm open with you being there through this process that, maybe as a last living testament that he has, that, where he could actually feel good about himself, that, where is she?
Sometimes if somebody's approached within a facility like this with an opportunity to, whether it be, get out and spend Thanksgiving or Christmas with their family in exchange for showing us the location of the body, that can be done and that can be arranged.
Well, back when I was arrested, they approached me with a deal. I'd serve 20 years total if I confessed to Kay Turner and Channy.
Mm-hmm.
Like I told my lawyer, I would confess in a heartbeat if I did either one of them.
So you don't know where she's at?
I wish I knew. No.
The DA's office had to decide whether to bring Aykroyd to trial after all this time, or negotiate a plea deal. While the 2010 investigation had turned up new information, like the fact that Richanda had disclosed her sexual abuse by Aykroyd to friends, there was still no smoking gun. Officials consulted with Byron and tried to involve his mother Linda, but she declined to make the trip from California. Byron had to make the decision alone.
I asked him, I'm like, what's the new evidence? Because I was convinced there had to have been new evidence because we went to a grand jury indictment and passed, we were moving forward. Wow, there's got to be a smoking gun. And when they revealed to me that there was no smoking gun, that's when I called for a break, and my wife and I was out there in the hall. I lost it. I'm like, gosh dang, I wish my dad and mom was here. This is a big decision. Do we take the deal or do we push it and go to trial and have the chance of losing it all? I'm like, I'm gonna take the deal. I'm not gonna gamble this guy getting away with it.
Right, I'll ask you then, sir, how do you plead to the single charge of the indictment, which alleges murder, alleged to have committed on or about July 10th, 1990, in Lynn County, Oregon, where it's alleged that you did unlawfully and intentionally cause the death of another human being, to wit, Rashanda Pickle, contrary to the statutes and against the peace and dignity of the state of Oregon. How do you plead to that charge, sir?
No contest.
Find that the plea of no contest is made freely, knowingly, and voluntarily in all respects. I'll accept the plea of no contest.
John Aykroyd's sitting there, he's looking forward, we did not make any eye contact. Went opened the door, he made a quick brief, and when he seen it was me, I'm the only one there connected to this. No support, pissed off. But at the same time, it felt good at the same time, knowing that I actually seen this through for Jenna, giving her a voice and all of it.
The no contest plea meant that Aykroyd wasn't admitting guilt, but also wasn't denying it. It guaranteed he would die behind bars. The location of Richanda's body remained a mystery, and the plea was immediately sealed. The details remained secret until early 2017, when the Oregonian asked a judge to seal them.
I was under a gag order that I couldn't go to the media. Where's the justice in all this? That, we don't get to know where she's at. I can't tell anybody about what's going on. How's this right? It definitely felt being victimized again. It was like, this fucking prick has more of a right than what we do.
These take so long. Usually about 20 minutes, so...
The Kay Turner and Richanda Pickle cases had now been resolved, and Melissa Sanders and Sheila Swanson's murders were eventually closed as well. Investigators Linda Snow and Ron Benson had uncovered new information, like the witness accounts of Aykroyd coming to the Sweet Home shop with bloody hands. They also confirmed that some items found near the teen's remains, like a used rivet and a beaded car seat cover, were commonly used by highway workers on the job. The investigators and the Lincoln County DA were satisfied that they had enough to prosecute Aykroyd, but taking the case to grand jury didn't seem worth the expense. Aykroyd was already locked up for good.
I've talked to the DA, and she believes that this is something we could have put in front of a grand jury if need be. The costs of prosecuting our case would have been huge with no additional outcome. So he was going to die in prison, one way or the other. So just being able to say that we could, if we needed to, that was our end goal, was to get it to that point.
In December of 2016, John Aykroyd died in prison. With him died the answers to many questions, leaving the unknowns to haunt his victims, their survivors, and investigators alike.
When you first hear the guy's dead, you're thinking, okay, a monster's gone. But then you kind of have that sad, emotional moment where, for Byron, she's not around. And he doesn't have that closure. He has that closure to John's dead, but he doesn't have that closure to where his sister is.
At least I got something. The families of these other victims, no closure. My heart goes out to them.
I had asked, can I, any way that I can go and talk to this man? And they said no. Do you remember? And I just wanted to look him in the eye and ask him if he did it.
Of course.
Did he remember it? Did he, Then when I found out that he died, I go, that's a rough thing to do. I was just so, I figured I would be, maybe at the end of this, that's what I wanted, was to have something. But I'm not now, so.
Sheila Swanson's brother Bart occasionally takes Highway 20 to visit the spot off Hayes Creek Road where his sister's body was found.
I go up there, to pretty much remind myself that I still haven't let it go. Let her know that I haven't let it go.
Byron keeps photos of his sister from childhood and thinks of her often, telling his own children that they had an Aunt Richanda who they'll never know.
I actually got a tattoo of it.
You do?
I do.
Oh, is your sister?
Yeah. Last summer. Yeah. It's just, didn't have any way to put it to rest. And it's a very big part of my life. And I just wanted to be able to have a celebration and stuff. You know, it's not a tattoo of hurt and shame, but it's of love. You know, just try to get some closure somehow.
Mark Foster has returned to volunteer police duty after interviews for this story rekindled a desire to protect his small rural community.
You know, these things, you can't go through these kind of things without it having some impact on you too. So I just spent a lot of time out on this road patrolling and just keeping an eye on the community. So maybe this year I can just be out there and if possible, prevent such a thing from ever occurring again.
Bill Hanlon stayed in touch with Kay Turner's mother after the trial and knows how much it meant to her that her daughter's killer was finally brought to justice, something that never would have happened without his perseverance. To this day, he keeps Kay in his thoughts every Christmas Eve.
I do a run every Christmas Eve morning. Kay Turner, yeah. I ultimately wrote her mother a Christmas card and told her I did that. She's the best memorial she could have. After the trial, the woman who was the presiding juror, her mother went out there and found her and said, I just want to tell you, the first time I saw you, I knew you were the woman who would save my daughter's soul. The day before we went for the Beck sentencing, we had the whole task force here. Her mother was here. She sat in and told stories about Kay Turner, her daughter. That was very satisfying. Everybody was listening, you know. It was great. Yeah.
Marlene Gabrielson grew up as a member of the Inupiaq people in Alaska, and she moved back there for a time after her rape, no longer feeling safe in Oregon. She eventually returned, but still struggles not just with the aftermath of the attack, but the knowledge that had she been believed, much of what followed might never have happened.
I figured it was because I was nothing. I wasn't going to amount to anything. I was brown and I was ugly. So, you know, you're not going to amount to anything. Don't think you are, you know. I think that's why I cowered so much back then.
And you haven't talked about it with people in those intervening years.
You're the first person. And you know what my first thought was? When I read that message, why would she care? Because that's the mindset I had with this whole thing from the gate. That's what made me come. It was because there's someone that actually cared.
You're the first, and you're the only survivor.
You know, which is a miracle. You know, and this makes me feel really good because there is a reason why I'm here. And I guess I am not that ugly, you know, and I'm not worthless.
We don't normally, we do not think those victims. That's just policy. I just want to have a discussion with you, just about including
My name?
Yeah, Marlene Gabrielson.
Yeah. Marlene K. Gabrielson. I'm a Inupiaq. I'm a strong woman.
Every question and every breath, every exhale leaves a little death. In this way, a memory that will wander with the ghost of Highway 20. Yeah, I know this road like the back of my head. Same purple stations on the effing bed. Phones and truck stops and fireworks stands. I know this road like the back of my hand.
welcome to the British Museum in London, and thank you for joining us. I hope you're settled in your seats now, ready to enjoy your very own private view of the British Museum's latest blockbuster exhibition on the Vikings.
As we take you through the exhibition, we'll be travelling to 4 continents and back across 1,000 years in time. And we'll be revealing the spectacular centrepiece of this show, the remains of a Viking royal warship.
It was an age that helped shape our world. Welcome to Vikings Live.
The British Museum's BP exhibition, Vikings, Life and Legend, has been years in the planning. It's the first exhibition to be held in the brand new Sainsbury Exhibition Gallery. This massive climate-controlled space has become temporary home to over 1,000 objects, including the longest Viking warship ever discovered. The curator of the exhibition, Dr. Gareth Williams, who's with us tonight, has led a team of experts from the British Museum, along with colleagues in Copenhagen and Berlin, to bring precious objects to London from all over the world. The Queen of Denmark, Her Majesty Margrethe II, was invited to open the exhibition.
I'm delighted to declare the exhibition Vikings, Life and Legend open.
She is a dominant descendant of the Viking kings and Spain.
What a thrill it is to enter this magical, spectacular space. We've got some of the world's great Viking experts with us tonight, but first of all, let's meet the director of the British Museum, Neil McGregor. Neil, hi. So why a Viking exhibition, and why now?
We put on an exhibition when there's new information to present, and we've got a huge amount of new information about the Vikings. There have been great archaeological finds in the last 30 years, you'll see some of them. We can look at those finds with new scientific techniques, which gives us more information. And since the last exhibition, the Cold War has come to an end, and we can work much more closely with our colleagues in Eastern Europe. So we can now present a quite new view of the Viking world.
And a world of extraordinary reach and contact.
So that's what's fascinating. This is a world of water. Sailing from Scandinavia, from the Baltic, the Vikings go west, of course, to Britain, Ireland, then on to Canada, south to Africa. They go north to the Arctic Circle, and then, perhaps most interesting of all, they go down the great Russian rivers, and they get to the Caspian, Central Asia, the Black Sea, Constantinople. It's a whole world that they bring together.
It's just amazing what they achieved, isn't it? So not just a view of the Viking world, but a view of the world, or at least the Western world, through the Viking eyes. Yeah. Any particular objects attracted your attention here? This is a very difficult question to ask you.
Well, obviously they're wonderful objects. If I had to steal one, if I were allowed to steal one, I think it would be a tiny little statue in silver of the god of war, Odin. This great masculine god who oversees the looting, the raiding, the raping, everything. And this little statue shows him in female dress, keeping in touch with his feminine side, because he's not only the god of war, he's exercising his female skills in magic, sorcery, prophecy. I think that's wonderful, these two sides together. And on either side of Odin, the ravens. One raven of memory, one raven of thought. They fly all over the world, and they come back and tell you what's going on. And In a sense, that's what we're doing in the exhibition, is what we're doing in the British Museum. We are Odin's ravens, going all over the world, bringing it together and thinking about it.
I saw it was a raven, but it's great. I love it.
Happy to be on.
Now we're approaching the Sainsbury Exhibitions Gallery.
Yes.
A great new space for the museum, isn't it? With conservation facilities and scientific facilities. But also, I guess, it gives you the space to show astonishing things.
That's the great advantage of this new space. It allows us, above all, to show the great warship, one of the main discoveries of the last 30 years. And we at last have a space big enough to show it, and with the conditions that we need to exhibit it. It's great.
Well, thanks very, very much. We'll chat a little later, we'll see you a bit later, and we'll see those ships very soon.
Good.
Viking ship, of course, is the most recognisable symbol of the age. An age which, I guess we could say, extends for about 300 years, from the 750s to the 1060s. And it's the ship which is one of the key themes of the exhibition.
There said that the region that he dwelt in is called Helgoland. He said that no man lived to the north of him. There is a port on the southward side of that land that men call Skirringis Her. He said a man might hardly sail there if he camped at night and had a fair wind each day.
The original Viking homelands are today's Denmark, Norway, Sweden and Finland. The territories are physically fragmented, laced with water. For millennia, this meant that transport was much easier by river, fjord and sea than by land. The tribal farming societies here had access to rich goods, furs, whalebone, amber and walrus ivory. Marketable resources that the Vikings would trade once they went global. And as they travelled and traded and raided, they shaped not just the past, but the world we all live in today.
Now, what it's critical to remember is that the name Viking didn't originally refer to a single ethnic group. Today we use the word Viking to describe all of Scandinavian society from 750 AD onwards, but when it first appears in Old Norse, Vikingur actually just means a pirate or a raider, and of course a pirate is not a pirate without his or her ship, which is why, Professor Neil Price, the exhibition starts with this really exquisite representation of a Viking ship.
Absolutely. And the reason it's at the beginning is that this is the absolute key to the Viking Age. Without the ship, none of this would happen at all. What we've got here is this beautiful brooch from Denmark, made of copper, and you've got the classic Viking ship. These beautiful clean lines, the dragon heads at either end, the square sail, you can see it furled on the mast there. And if you look very closely, all along the hull are these little circular things which are either shields or the holes for the oars.
And why do we have this special relationship between Vikings and boats? I mean, why is the boat so central to their identity?
The really critical thing to understand about the Viking period in Scandinavia is that this is a maritime society. Everything depends on the sea and the rivers and access to water. One way or another, everybody was affected by the sea, and they had some kind of contact with the means of transport to get out onto it.
And that's so important to remember, isn't it? Because I think when we think of Vikings, we kind of automatically imagine macho male warriors. But as you say, this is something that everybody at every level of society is involved with.
And really, everybody. What we're coming to here is two of my really favourite exhibits in the show. These are toys, and the lives of Viking children are some of the most inaccessible aspects of the Viking Age. It's so hard to reach Viking kids. But every now and then, when we're lucky enough to get preservation conditions that mean that wood and organic things survive, we get things like this. Little toy boats. The smaller one at the top is from Dublin. The lower one here is from Hedeby in Denmark. And I think it's easy to imagine little Viking girls and boys floating these down the streams. So it really is everyone in Viking society that has the ship in their minds.
I mean, something like this tells us what Vikings of all ages did, but can the archaeology ever get us into their minds, into the Viking mind?
Yes, I think it can. One of the exciting things about Viking material culture, the things they made, is that wherever possible they decorated them. We've just seen this ship brooch, a ship you can wear. So some Viking person has had this on their clothes. But the same idea goes through anything that you can decorate. So jewellery is not just something to hold your clothes together. It's a visual world full of decoration and art with meaning. A weapon is not just something to bash people with. It's covered in decoration. So you see some of these things here. Look in the middle here, this beautiful dress pin with the dragon head. This is something to hold your cloak together, but it's not just a functional object. This marvellous head on the top there looks like a dragon. This leads us into this thought world of mythological creatures, the invisible population of supernatural beings with which the Vikings shared their world.
And what's so important, isn't it, to remember at this time is we shouldn't really be using words like religion and belief, because those weren't options for the Vikings. I mean, for them, dragons were real.
Absolutely. I think we should talk about knowledge. If you can imagine asking a Viking, do you believe in trolls? Do you believe in Odin? It's like asking, do you believe in the sea? It's something obvious. When we use the word supernatural, it's entirely wrong. They're natural, purely natural. But our best chance to really get inside the Vikings' heads is through burials, because unlike all the rest, they're deliberate. So when we find a Viking grave and excavate it, we're encountering something that is a direct product of the Vikings themselves, what they wanted to do. Burials contain all kinds of different things. From the most mundane objects, items of personal dress, things you clean your ears with, there's ironing boards, all kinds of things like that. Weapons, of course, and all the way up to the biggest things of all, ships.
Yeah, because sometimes they're actually buried in ships, aren't they, in boats?
They certainly are.
We're actually reconstructing a Viking boat burial, aren't we?
We are.
And so is it going to be your sort of archaeologist's dream burial? You're going to put in everything there that you would love to find in the ground?
Up to a point, we'll have a go, yeah.
Okay, see what we can do. Make those Vikings live.
So when you find a dead person with all the objects laid out around them, they're there because the Vikings wanted them to be there.
And what do you think the ships in those graves actually mean? What do they represent?
It's hard to really say, but they could be a means of transport to take the dead to wherever it is they're going, a ship from this world into another world. Equally, they might just be the most expensive possession of the dead person of their community, a bit like being buried in your Mercedes. Fantastic sources of information, and they're fantastic windows on that Viking mind.
See where the long-sided warship lies, splendid off the shore. The bright dragon's mane above the cargo shines. Since he was launched from rollers, his decorated neck is burnished with gold.
The vessels of the were relatively small, with crews of around 40 men. But through the Viking Age, ships grew larger and more sophisticated. They were powered not only by many oars, but by splendid sails. As so often, technology matched design. An impulse for exploration and a hunger for wealth powered the development of both deeply built cargo ships that could cross oceans and great warships. These were the true Viking longships, which in fleets could conquer nations. And the largest warship ever discovered is at the heart of the exhibition.
And this is it. The longest Viking ship ever found. And not only that, but the remains of a royal warship. What's been teased out of the earth has been housed in this giant steel frame to give us a sense of the scale and size of the original ship. And you just have to think of it in its prime, almost exactly 1,000 years ago. Nudging its way out to the sea, 100 men on board, 80 rowers powering those oars, and up above them a giant mast with a sail made of wool or linen, dyed in bright colours.
They're wonderful ships. They are remarkable boats, and they are very, very good they're extremely seaworthy boats. I think that's one of the things that always excite me when I see them. They have made quite a lot of, several full-sized copies of Viking ships. And if you see a boat like that on the sea, but you imagine when you suddenly look out to sea and you suddenly find that half the horizon is full of them, I think your heart went to the bottom of your boots.
The remains of this magnificent ship were found by chance in 1996 in a harbour just next to the Viking Ship Museum at Roskilde in Denmark. Workers were dredging the harbour to expand the museum and unearthed a ship's graveyard right beneath their feet. It must have felt like a gift from the old gods. Getting the ship's timbers safely onto dry land and over here was an immensely delicate operation. And one of the people responsible for that, and then the 2-week job of installing them in the exhibition, is Christiana Stratkovern, working with curator Gareth Williams.
The discovery of the ship's a fascinating story, isn't it?
Not only is it the longest one, but we can see from the ship timbers that is dated back to 1025, but also the dendrochronology showed that the ship was built in Norway. While we were investigating the ship, we could see that there were repairs. They show that the ship has been repaired in the Baltic area in 1039, meaning that the ship has been sailing from Oslo to the Baltic and ends up in the bottom of Roskilde Fjord. So it has an amazing story really before it ends up there. They put the ship together with lots of small parts and pieces, and then they fit it together with all these smaller parts, also with the ribs that will come in between, and all these fittings. It makes the ship flexible and strong.
Yes, we can see very clearly here how the planks themselves are riveted together with the square road plate for the plank.
So each of these
major ribs marks where a rowing bench would appear.
Yes, exactly.
So we have a rowing bench across the ship on top of that.
Yeah.
And that gives us the space between the rowing benches. That helps us estimate the overall length of the missing parts and gives us an idea of the total size of the crew.
Yes, that's true.
And we know there have been a steersman as well at the back, and the steering oar on one side. The
Yes.
steer's board gives us, of course, the modern name starboard
Yeah.
for this side, the
Yes,
right-hand side
starboard
of
side,
the,
yes,
of the ship.
that's true.
But we also hear in historical accounts about forecastle men, so there'd be extra fighting men at the front of the boat. With this width, there's space for more than just the two people to either side. So, how many do you think the total crew would have been for this?
The estimate is approximately 100 people on board this ship. And they would live here, and they would row, and they would sail, and they would do everything you need to do. They are now putting in, first of all, the plank line, the steel line has to be there, and they are looking on the drawing to figure out the exact number of the plank and the exact placement. And we are building this part now, and we have laid out plank number 5 and 6. So this one here, this is the keel. The keel is the full length of the ship. In fact, the keel from the aft to the front was 32 meters, and that is the longest keel ever found on a Viking ship.
The remains of Roskilde 6 hint at the skills that went into this high point of Viking craftsmanship.